Hey guys, tonight we're stepping off the cobbled streets of modern life and into the uneven stones of ancient Rome. Imagine yourself wandering down a street 2,000 years ago, the air a cocktail of baking bread, donkey dung and sizzling olive oil. You pass laundry fluttering between crooked buildings and vendors shouting about figs wine or the freshest fish hauled in from Ostia. And tucked among these everyday stalls is something you might not expect: a barber's shop already crowded with men lounging on stools waiting for their turn to be trimmed, shaved or simply entertained. It feels strangely familiar, doesn't it? That casual hum of voices, the smell of oil and hair powder, the clink of metal against metal. Yet at the same time it's alien, because here, a bad haircut isn't your biggest risk. It's a slice from a blunt bronze razor. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this kind of hygiene regime without a tetanus shot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push aside the cloth curtain and step into the Roman barber's shop. It's cramped, just wide enough for a wooden chair, a little bench, and a shelf where tools lie scattered. You notice the razor-thin, slightly curved bronze, not the sleek stainless steel you're used to. Next to it is a jar of oil, another of crushed pumice stone for smoothing skin, and a ragged sponge that you try not to think too hard about. The barber himself, sleeves rolled, leans over a client, scraping carefully down a cheek. Each motion is deliberate but not exactly reassuring. What grabs you, though, isn't the scrape of metal, it's the chatter. Men are leaning in, tossing remarks back and forth, swapping rumors like coins. This isn't just a grooming spot, it's an information exchange. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of scrolling Twitter. But instead of hashtags, it's your barber whispering, "Did you hear what Senator so-and-so did last night?" The historian Pliny the Elder tells us that barbers arrived in Rome around the 3rd century BCE, imported from Sicily, by a wealthy man who thought grooming was a sign of civilization. Before that, Romans were mostly bearded and scruffy. Suddenly, with barbershops available, the clean-shaven look became fashionable, so fashionable that by the time of Julius Caesar, going unshaven was considered downright sloppy. You can almost imagine Caesar himself sitting stiffly, insisting that every stray hair be removed to preserve his immaculate image. And of course, it wasn't just about looks. In a society obsessed with honor, appearance signaled everything: wealth, discipline, even loyalty to certain schools of philosophy. A neat shave suggested modernity, while a shaggy beard might mark you as a stoic thinker. But tucked inside every snip and scrape was also conversation, and not always the innocent kind. Gossip was the unofficial second service of any barber. Picture this: a young man nervously seated for his first shave, gripping the chair as the razor hovers near his throat. He doesn't just leave smoother-faced, he leaves with a head full of news about a neighbor's affair, a politician's secret meeting, or a merchant caught cheating scales. Whether true or exaggerated, those whispers traveled fast, bouncing from barbershop to marketplace. And it makes sense, doesn't it? In a world without newspapers or evening talk shows, where do you go for updates? The barber. He sees everyone: senators, soldiers, shopkeepers, slaves. Each head under his razor is a potential source. Each conversation overheard becomes a story to be retold. You're not just getting your beard trimmed, you're stepping into the bloodstream of Roman social life. Of course, you might be wondering, wasn't it risky to have your reputation shredded along with your stubble? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether gossip in barbershops was seen as harmless banter or a serious threat to public honor. Imagine the nightmare: you walk in just needing a trim, and by the time you leave, half the neighborhood thinks you've skimmed temple donations or slept with someone's spouse. That's the Roman version of a bad Yelp review. And here's the quirky part: some Romans actually avoided barbers for this very reason. The philosopher Musonius Rufus suggested men keep their beards partly out of simplicity, but maybe also as a way to dodge the gossip factory. Others, like Emperor Hadrian, grew their beards back in the 2nd century CE, reversing the fashion, possibly because they liked the look, possibly because shaving was just too socially risky. Still, for most, the lure was irresistible. Clean-shaven skin was the mark of refinement and gossip was the price of entry. You can almost feel yourself easing into the chair, now that tiny thrill of danger as the razor skims your throat, while in your ear the barber murmurs, "Have you heard the latest about the elections?" And as you lean back, half terrified, half relaxed, you realize this humble little shop is more than a place for hair. It's a pulse point of Rome itself, where blades and words cut equally deep. You're still in that little Roman barber shop, letting the chatter buzz around you while your eyes wander over the tools of the trade. It's almost hypnotic, the gleam of bronze in lamplight, the faint sweetness of olive oil mingling with the sharper bite of vinegar used to wipe blades. This isn't a sterile salon with gleaming mirrors. It's more like a cross between a carpenter's bench and a gossip lounge. On the shelf you notice razors with curved blades, some looking worryingly dull. They're sharpened with pumice stone or even whetstones stolen from kitchen use. Next to them lies a collection of tweezers, long and thin for plucking stray hairs and little spatulas for mixing scented pastes. Romans were obsessed with odors, partly because the city itself smelled like sewage and sweat. So barbers stocked perfumes, resins from Arabia, crushed myrrh, even oils infused with rose petals. If you thought your local barber trying to upsell pomade was annoying, imagine a Roman one waving a vial of imported frankincense under your nose. You lean closer. There's also a pot of alum used to stop bleeding when razors inevitably nick skin. No disposable razors here. Cuts were almost guaranteed. And yes, tetanus was still waiting for its official discovery, but if you walked out without an infection, you counted yourself lucky. Clients dabbed on cologne not just to smell nice, but to mask the faint iron tang of blood. It wasn't only men lining up either. Roman women, especially the wealthier ones, had their own rituals. While they usually relied on household slaves for hair and makeup perfumes, and depilation often brought them into contact with barbers or specialist beauticians. You picture a young woman purchasing oil infused with cinnamon, hoping it would turn heads at the next banquet. Beauty wasn't private, it was public theatre, and these tools were props. The whole arrangement feels strangely modern. Your shampoo bottles and beard balms are their little clay jars. The scents filling your bathroom, citrus, sandalwood, lavender, are echoes of recipes first blended in places like this. The main difference, your barber doesn't also double as your neighborhood's unofficial newscaster, slipping juicy tidbits while scrubbing your scalp. But in Rome, every scrape of the razor came with an extra whispers. Imagine the barber leaning down, warm oil dripping from his fingers as he murmurs, "Did you hear about the senator's nephew caught gambling away his father's fortune?" Suddenly the perfume doesn't just cover the smell of sweat. It perfumes the rumor, making it seem more exotic, more irresistible. It's here you learn that grooming and gossip weren't separate. They blended like oil and wine, inseparable in Roman daily life. And the barber was the master of both. He knew how to mix oils to make you smell like luxury, and he knew how to blend stories so you walked out carrying more than a fresh shave. You carried an idea, maybe even a suspicion. A mainstream fact anchors it, the Latin word tonstrina referred to the barbershop, and tunzor was the barber. But beyond their job title, tunzors were woven into community life. Some were even well-known personalities. Think of them as minor celebrities, the kind who knew all the players but never appeared in official histories. And here's a quirk for you. Some Romans believed that mixing certain oils into your scalp could ward off baldness. Spoiler, it didn't. Recipes included things like vinegar, pigeon droppings, and onion juice. You can almost smell it already. Definitely not a scent you'd want lingering after your shave. And yet men desperate to keep their hair would sit obedient as schoolboys while the barber massaged bird poop into their heads. Historians still argue whether this obsession with grooming was truly about hygiene or mostly about status. After all, the Romans weren't exactly winning awards for sanitation. Baths where communal water was often filthy, and deodorant came in the form of crushed herbs stuffed under armpits. But a neat haircut that could convince others you were refined, civilized, a proper Roman. So as you sit there surrounded by oils, razors, and perfumes, you begin to understand this wasn't just self-care, it was identity. To be shaved was to be Roman, to join the community of clean faces that defined the city's elite, and to walk past the barber's chair without stopping, that would make you stand out in ways you might not survive socially. And while the tools clink softly back into place, the conversations keep flowing, ready to cut even deeper than the blades. The razor has just grazed past your jawline, leaving that faint sting that makes you flinch when you notice the real show isn't the shave, it's the chatter swirling around you. The barbershop hums like a hive, not from clippers buzzing, but from words darting back and forth. You realize that every haircut comes with its own soundtrack of whispers, and if you lean back just a little, you can catch fragments that are far juicier than the scrape of bronze against stubble. A man across the room lowers his voice, though not nearly enough, and tells the barber that he's heard Marcus the merchant hasn't been paying his temple dues. Another pipes up about a senator's daughter sneaking out after dark, escorted by someone who definitely wasn't her fiancé. You almost want to grab popcorn, or olives in this case, because the stories are endless. It's like binge-watching a soap opera, but live, unfiltered, and accompanied by the faint smell of olive oil and sweat. You think about your own first trim here in Rome. Nervous, stiff-backed, you'd have been more worried about the blade than the talk. But the moment the barber leaned in and asked, "Want to hear something interesting?" that's when you'd have known this wasn't just grooming, it was initiation into a network. Here's the straightforward history bit. By the late Republic, barbershops were such central hangouts that they became known as the ears of the city. Every rumor seemed to pass through them. Politicians knew this too. Some even planted stories with barbers to steer public opinion. In a world without pamphlets or newspapers, gossip was the media and barbers were the broadcasters. Of course, not all whispers were innocent. Sometimes they cut reputations sharper than the razor itself. Picture a man walking out freshly shaven only to find neighbors eyeing him oddly because the barber had just accidentally mentioned that he'd been seen dining with the wrong faction. Whether true or fabricated, the story stuck to him like the smell of oil in his beard. And that's where things get tricky. Historians still argue whether gossip was viewed as a harmless pastime or a dangerous weapon. To some Romans it was entertainment, to others it was social assassination carried out with words instead of daggers. There's even a quirky tidbit you'll love. Barbers were sometimes accused of deliberately nicking a client's face when they wanted to send a message. A tiny scar on the cheek could become a mark of shame, a reminder that your reputation had taken a hit inside that shop. Imagine leaving a haircut not just with shorter hair, but with a rumor stitched into your skin. You can almost feel yourself sliding deeper into the chair, now torn between the soothing rhythm of the razor strokes and the electric thrill of overheard secrets. The barber doesn't just shape your beard, he shapes the story others will tell about you tomorrow. Every word, every half whisper has weight. Whisper. And yet, despite the risks, people flocked here. The barbershop was magnetic. Where else could you hear the latest scandal before it spread to the forum? Where else could you test the temperature of public opinion before making your next move in politics or business? You came for a shave, but you stayed for the network. It makes you wonder, what would you have done during that first cut? Would you have kept your head down, praying the barber didn't mention your name? Or would you have leaned in, eager to trade a rumor of your own, cementing your place in the swirl of Roman society? Because here's the truth in Rome. Silence was suspicious. If you didn't share a story, people assumed you were hiding something. And in a culture that thrived on exposure, being thought of as secretive could be just as damaging as being thought of as scandalous. So you sit the razor gliding one last time across your cheek and realize that your first cut has already initiated you. You're no longer just a customer, you're a participant in Rome's favorite pastime, trimming reputations while trimming beards. The razor is set aside for a moment, glinting faintly in the lamplight, and you glance at the man who's just finished his shave. He stands, stretches, and hands a coin to the barber. But instead of leaving, he lingers by the doorway, half listening, half adding his own tidbits. That's when it hits you. These barbers weren't simply working with hair, they were working with people, and people came in every shade of freedom, Take a closer look. Many barbers in early Rome were slaves either owned by households or rented out to serve a community. Imagine being shaved by someone who technically belonged to another man, yet who held a razor against your throat and a catalogue of secrets in his head. It's a strange, almost absurd balance of power. You owned him, but he might know more about you than your wife did. And then there were the freedmen, former slaves who had bought or earned their way to independence. Some set up tiny shops of their own, carving out a living one haircut at a time. These barbers weren't just scraping faces, they were scraping together, status climbing inch by inch in a society that didn't make upward mobility easy. You picture one of them, a freedman with sharp eyes, hands steady from years of practice. He knows how to flatter senators, how to comfort nervous youths on their first shave, and most importantly, how to package gossip so it sounds like truth. For him, every whispered rumor isn't just entertainment, it's currency. He trades in stories as much as in styles, and every coin he pockets is doubled in value by the knowledge he gathers. Here's the solid fact: Tunzas, whether slave or free, were often clustered in busy streets, especially near the Forum where traffic was heaviest. Their shops were tiny but strategically placed. Being near the center of Roman life meant maximum access to clients and maximum exposure to chatter worth passing along. And here's a quirky side note: some wealthy Romans kept personal barbers as household slaves, grooming them like we might groom a personal trainer or stylist. These barbers became almost family, yet never truly equal. They stood silently during dinners, oiling hair or adjusting beards, all while absorbing every careless word spoken at the table. Imagine the pillow talk they overheard, the plans whispered in confidence. Then imagine those same words floating back to the street the next day, shaved into another man's ear. Historians still argue whether freed barbers could ever fully shake off the stigma of slavery. Was a man truly respected if he once stood as someone else's property, razor in hand, or did his craft grant him a unique position, straddling class boundaries in a way few other professions could? It's a debate with no neat answer, but it makes you see these shops not just as grooming stations, but as crossroads of power, status and memory. And you can't help but notice the barber's delicate balancing act. Too much gossip, and he risks offending a powerful client. Too little, and his shop loses its allure. He must measure his words like he measures a haircut, just enough trimming to keep things neat, never so much that he draws blood. You lean back, feeling the weight of that strange duality. In Rome, a barber might be your servant, or your equal, your confidant, or your betrayer. His razor could nick your skin, his tongue could slice your reputation. Yet you keep coming back because in this society grooming isn't optional and silence is suspicious. As the next customer slides into the chair, you realize that every snip of the scissors, every scrape of the razor is part of a larger performance, one that blends slavery, freedom, ambition, and gossip into a single razor-sharp art form. The street outside hums with carts and shouting vendors, but inside the barbershop, the noise takes on a different rhythm. You hear names, big names, tossed around casually, as if senators and generals were neighbors who'd borrowed a cup of garum sauce and failed to return it. That's when you realize the gossip in this chair isn't confined to love affairs and stolen amphorae of wine. It threads directly into the heart of Roman politics. The Forum is only a short walk away, that great open square where speeches are hurled, deals are struck and reputations rise or crumble like sandcastles. But here in the barbershop you get the prelude. Clients wander in fresh from a debate, still flushed with victory or fuming with defeat, and before they've even brushed the clippings from their shoulders, they're spilling their version of events. Within minutes, the barber is murmuring it into the ear of his next customer, trimmed and translated into rumor. You can almost see the cycle. The chatter that begins here trickles into the Forum, bounces off marble walls and rushes back in waves, sharper, more exaggerated, more dangerous. A senator may stand on the rostra, proclaiming his virtue, but if the barbers are whispering that he cheats on his taxes or mistreats his slaves, his words carry less weight. Public opinion, it seems, is shaped as much by bronze razors as by bronze statues. Here's the mainstream fact in Rome. Publica fama, public rumor, was considered nearly as powerful as law. Jurists even recognized it in certain cases, allowing gossip to count as evidence of someone's character. Imagine that your barber's half-heard whispers might someday tip the scales in court. And here's a quirky tidbit. One story claims that Cato the Younger, the famously stern senator, would march straight from his barber to the forum, his freshly shaved chin gleaming as proof of his discipline. He supposedly believed that an unshaven face weakened his authority. Whether true or not, it paints a picture of men so conscious of image that a missed shave could undermine an argument about the Republic's survival. Historians still argue whether barbers themselves deliberately shaped politics or merely reflected the currents swirling around them. Were they puppet masters steering conversations from their stools, or just amplifiers repeating whatever floated in on their client's breath? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, with some barbers quietly tugging strings while others simply enjoyed being in the know. You imagine sitting in the chair while the barber leans in razor poised and says softly, "Word is Marcus Crassus is buying more land again." That single line, half fact, half speculation, could ripple outward, stirring resentment among rivals and fear among neighbors. A few strokes of the blade and you walk out carrying not just a smooth face, but a sharpened sense of what's coming next in Roman politics. It feels almost dangerous, doesn't it? As if the real forum isn't the marble plaza, but this cramped little shop with oil-slicked hands and scattered hair clippings. Here, reputations are shaved down, reshaped, and sometimes cut off entirely. And as you glance around at the men chuckling and muttering, you realize that everyone knows it. No one here is only a customer. Everyone is both source and audience, barber and broadcaster participant in a theater of whispers that stretches from backstreet stools to the Senate itself. You're watching closely now, seeing how much a simple haircut means in this city. The man in the chair doesn't just request a trim, he requests a statement. When the barber snips his fringe shorter, the man instantly looks more youthful, more in step with current fashion. Another asks for a neatly squared beard, projecting gravitas as if ready to lecture on Stoic philosophy at the next dinner party. Styles here aren't trivial, they're announcements. Take the clean-shaven face by the late Republic, it's practically the Roman uniform. To arrive in the forum with a shaggy beard is to scream either poverty or stubborn eccentricity. Cicero himself always conscious of image mocked rivals for looking too scruffy, as if unkempt hair equaled unkempt morals. And you can't help but smile 2,000 years later. Your boss might not dock your pay for messy hair, but the principle is the same appearance equals credibility. But then fashions shift. You remember Emperor Hadrian? He famously brought the beard back into vogue in the 2nd century. CE supposedly to hide some scars on his face, or as others speculate, to emphasize his admiration for Greek philosophers who were rarely clean-shaven. Suddenly beards become trendy again and barbers adjust. One day they're scraping every chin raw, the next they're carefully oiling and trimming new growth, shaping whiskers into marks of dignity. Here's a mainstream fact: Roman hairstyles were so tied to identity that archaeologists today use busts and statues to date portraits. The fringe of Augustus, the curls of Nero, the full beard of Marcus Aurelius, each ruler's hair became the fashion template for his reign. Imagine a society where you could tell the political era by glancing at someone's bangs. And here's a quirky tidbit: some philosophers deliberately kept their beards wild, using them as intellectual billboards. A messy beard shouted, "I spend my time thinking, not grooming." The barber's role in those cases neglected, perhaps even ridiculed. You picture a barber sighing as yet another Stoic walked by, refusing his chair in the name of higher wisdom. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans had much choice in these fashions, or whether they simply followed the lead of emperors and elites. Was your hairstyle a personal decision, or just another way to signal loyalty in a society where deviation could raise eyebrows, or worse? It's a fair question. You settle into the rhythm of it now, imagining yourself walking out with a carefully shaped look, a visible badge of belonging. The barber pats your shoulder, dusts the stray hairs from your cloak, and you realize he's just crafted more than your appearance. He's crafted your identity in the eyes of everyone you'll pass today, at the forum, in the baths, on the street. It's a strange thought, but in Rome, the line between hair and honor is razor thin, and the man holding the scissors knows it better than anyone. The razor slides once more, this time across another client's cheek, and you notice the sudden hush that falls when a name, an important name, is mentioned. Whispers become tighter, closer to the ear. A senator's private dealings, a magistrate's reckless affair. The air seems to thicken heavy with the knowledge that a single careless sentence here could travel across the city like wildfire. You lean back and imagine it. A man exits this very barbershop, his chin freshly shaven, his beard dust swept away, but clinging invisibly to him is a rumor planted like a seed. By the time he reaches the forum, that seed sprouts. By nightfall, the entire city buzzes with it. A scandal is born in the barber's chair, and scandals loved the Roman elite. Senators and generals paraded dignity in public, but behind the marble columns lay as much intrigue as any reality show you've binged. The barber, positioned at the crossroads of grooming and gossip, was often the accidental or deliberate midwife of those scandals. Here's the historical anchor. Julius Caesar himself was once rumored to dye his hair with a mixture of lead and vinegar to keep it from thinning, and barbers supposedly whispered about his vanity. Whether true or embroidered stories like this spread easily, chipping away at the aura of invincibility Rome's leaders worked so hard to maintain. Now for the quirky bit. There's a tale of a barber who, while shaving a magistrate, accidentally mentioned that the man's wife had been seen shopping for jewels far beyond her means. The cut was smooth, but the words left a wound deeper than any razor nick. The next day, creditors came knocking, emboldened by gossip. You almost laugh. Forget market regulation. The barber's tongue just adjusted the economy. Historians still argue whether barbers intentionally weaponized this chatter, or whether it was simply the natural byproduct of too many ears and too many egos in one room. Were they schemers or just conduits? The evidence is slippery, but the possibility makes your skin prickle. Picture yourself in that chair. The barber leans close his hand, steady his razor a whisper away from your jugular. "You didn't hear this from me," he breathes, "but the consul's nephew was caught bribing voters." You swallow hard, not because of the blade, but because you suddenly hold a piece of information that could shift friendships, alliances, even careers. It's intoxicating and terrifying. And just as quickly, you realize the risk. What if the gossip is false? What if repeating it paints you as the scandal? In Rome, words carried weight heavier than stone. A slander could follow you for life, carved into memory more sharply than a sculptor's chisel. So you sit still, razor scraping, heart beating faster, not from fear of the cut, but from the knowledge that in this tiny shop, reputations can bleed out as quickly as faces. And the barber? He smiles faintly, knowing his role in both. The chair creaks under the weight of a new client, and you notice his bearing is different, straight-backed, purposeful, the kind of posture hammered into the body by endless drills. He's a soldier, fresh from the camp, and even before the barber lifts a hand, you can see what's coming. His hair will be clipped close, his beard sheared down to almost nothing. Discipline shows not only in how he marches, but in how he looks. In the Roman legions, grooming wasn't just vanity, it was strategy. Soldiers were expected to keep their hair short, their faces smooth. A clean shave made it harder for an enemy to grab during hand-to-hand combat. Short hair also meant fewer lice in the ranks, a small mercy when you were living in tents and trudging miles in armor. You picture rows of men lined up before a campaign barber's, buzzing about with razors and scissors, turning the ragged into the regimented. Here's your firm historical fact. Sources suggest that by the time of Scipio Africanus in the 3rd century BCE, the short, neat soldier's cut was already becoming a standard. It wasn't just about hygiene, it symbolized unity, a visible reminder that every man in the line was part of one body. And here's the quirky detail. Some accounts mention barbers being attached directly to military camps, essentially functioning as army staff. Imagine a camp follower not just sharpening blades for battle, but also for beards, trimming legionaries between skirmishes. Their gossip must have traveled 2 whispers about the general's strategy, or who had been seen sneaking extra rations. The Roman grapevine may have been fertilized in camp as much as in the city. Historians still argue whether strict grooming rules were universal across all legions or varied by commander. Did every soldier in Caesar's armies shave, or did some units relax the rules? Evidence is patchy, but the idea of uniform neatness persists in both written accounts and carved reliefs. You lean forward, picturing the scene: a soldier perched on a camp stool, armor stacked at his feet, while the barber scrapes at his chin with a dull blade. Around them, comrades crack jokes, swap tales, maybe even hum marching songs. The cut itself is quick, but the chatter lingers, binding men together in camaraderie. And just like in the city shops, secrets slip out. Maybe a soldier grumbles about poor pay or hints at a commander's mistake. By the time the barber finishes, the story has already traveled 3 tents down. There's something almost tender about it, this moment of vulnerability, battle-hardened men letting another man press a blade to their throats. In a world of blood and iron, the barber provided not only grooming, but a sliver of normalcy, a reminder of civilian life back in Rome. And as the soldier in the chair rises, chin gleaming, helmet tucked under his arm, you sense that the razor has done more than shave. It has reinforced discipline, tied him visibly to his legion, and reminded everyone watching that even in the chaos of war, Roman order began with something as simple as a haircut. The rhythm of snipping slows for a moment as a different kind of client slips through the curtain, a woman draped in Astola bracelets clinking softly as she settles onto the bench. The men in the room shuffle, some amused, some annoyed, but no one is surprised. Women had their own beauty routines in Rome, but barbers, beauticians, and household slaves often overlapped in their duties. This wasn't just a men's world. Grooming was a shared language across genders. Wealthier Roman women usually kept entire teams of attendants, skilled in braiding, curling, and applying cosmetics. These slaves were sometimes called ornatrices, and their reputations mattered almost as much as their mistresses. But every so often a woman ventured into a public shop to buy perfumes, oils, or to have a troublesome patch of hair removed. Picture her reclining slightly as the barber plucks at her eyebrows with long tweezers, each tiny sting accompanied by whispered commentary about who wore what at the last banquet. Here's your straightforward fact: Roman women used depilatories made from a mix of resins, vinegar, and sometimes even arsenic. Yes, arsenic. Smooth legs were a fashion ideal, and they were willing to suffer and risk to achieve it. And the quirky bit? Some recipes for removing hair included crocodile dung imported from Egypt. Imagine the poor slave tasked with applying that paste while her mistress sat fanning herself, pretending not to notice the smell. If you thought modern beauty products were strange, Rome takes the prize for creative unpleasantness. Of course, gossip flowed just as freely for women as for men. A lady might lean in close to the barber and ask in her sweetest voice if he'd heard about the senator's mistress flaunting new jewels. Within an hour, the story might spread across 3 neighborhoods, reaching ears that would weaponize it at the next social gathering. You realize that in a culture where marriages were often political alliances, a whispered scandal about a wife's indiscretions could topple more than reputations. It could alter power balances between entire families. Historians still argue whether respectable Roman matrons regularly visited barbershops, or if such appearances were rare, confined mostly to courtesans and women of lower rank. The evidence is murky, with poetry and satire offering tantalizing hints, but little certainty. What is clear is that beauty, fashion, and gossip were never confined by gender. Both men and women sharpened their looks and their words in the same spaces. You imagine it now: the woman rises from the chair, her eyebrows neatly shaped, her hair scented with cinnamon oil. As she glides back into the street, she carries more than perfume. She carries whispers, half true, half invented, ready to sprinkle into the ears of her friends over the next round of wine. And you understand, whether in togas or stolas, Romans used grooming as both mask and megaphone, a way to announce who they were and who they wanted others to believe them to be. The shop feels suddenly sharper, as if the glint of the razor has taken on new weight. You've been lulled by the rhythm of chatter and grooming, but now you sense the darker side of this trade. because for all its oils and perfumes, the barber's chair also carried risk. You glance at the razor again, bronze or iron-honed, but never flawless. The blade is thin, its edge uneven, and the barber's hand steady only as long as his attention is. One slip, one twitch, and a client might leave with more than a nick. Blood wasn't uncommon here. A steady trickle down the jaw, dabbed with alum to staunch the sting. Most shrugged it off, but every so often infection set in. No antibiotics, no antiseptic, just prayer and a poultice. You shudder, realizing how casually Romans flirted with danger for the sake of smooth cheeks. Here's your hard historical fact. Roman razors were notoriously crude compared to modern steel. Archaeological finds show small curved blades, often more like knives than precision tools. Using them required skill, but even the best tonsor couldn't guarantee a clean cut every time. Now the quirky tidbit: some clients were so fearful of razors that they preferred to burn stray hairs off with hot walnut shells. Yes, you heard that right, cracking a shell, lighting it and singeing off whiskers. The smell must have been atrocious, but perhaps less terrifying than trusting a distracted barber with a blade at your throat. And then there's the whisper of something darker. Ancient writers hint at stories of razors used not just for grooming, but for assassination. A barber alone with a powerful client had the perfect opportunity. A blade, a vulnerable throat, no witnesses. Was it rumor? Was it reality? Historians still argue. Some claim the fear was exaggerated, others suspect there may have been real cases buried in silence. You can almost imagine a senator gripping the chair's arms, smiling politely, while wondering if this shave might be his last. Even without malice, the chair was a place of vulnerability. Think of the trust it took to sit still while someone hovered over your jugular, the edge of cold metal brushing your skin. In a city obsessed with betrayal and plots, that kind of trust was a rare commodity. You lean back in your own imaginary seat, feeling the razor skim a little too close, the barber's breath warm against your ear. "Steady," he mutters. You try not to flinch. The smallest twitch and the story of your life might end here with nothing more glorious than a slip in a barbershop. And maybe that's why gossip and blades blended so well in this space. Both carried risk, both could wound, both demanded caution. You left with a sharper face, yes, but also the faint reminder that every visit carried danger, not just to your skin, but to your reputation, maybe even your life. The barber sets aside his razor-brushing clippings into a dusty pile, and you catch sight of something odd, a small pouch of hair swept from the floor and carefully tied shut. It's not trash, it's treasure of a different kind. In Rome, hair wasn't just waste, it carried weight in ritual, superstition, even magic. You remember hearing that newborns often had their first lock of hair offered to the household gods. Soldiers, before leaving for campaign, might cut a tuft and dedicate it to Mars for protection. And when someone died, mourners sometimes clipped strands as keepsakes, tokens of both grief and memory. Suddenly, the little pile of clippings in the corner feels more like relics than refuse. Here's your firm historical fact: Romans associated hair with personal vitality, sometimes using it in sacrifices or religious dedications. The poet Ovid even described lovers exchanging locks of hair as tokens of devotion. Now for the quirky tidbit: some Romans believed that hair clippings could be used in love potions or curses. Witches were said to snatch fallen strands from barbershops to weave into spells. You can almost see a shadowy figure sweeping through at night, stuffing pockets with curls and whiskers, muttering incantations as she goes. It's both eerie and oddly practical waste turned into weapon. Historians still argue how seriously Romans took these omens. Were they quaint superstitions mocked by the educated elite? Or did even senators secretly tuck away their clippings, wary of what might be done with them? Evidence is scattered, but the persistence of such stories suggests a deep unease about leaving bits of yourself behind in public. You sit there imagining the discomfort the barber finishes, wipes the blade and sweeps your hair into a little pile. Do you feel safe walking away knowing someone could pocket those strands? Do you laugh it off as silly, or do you insist on burning them yourself just in case? And it wasn't just clippings. Baldness itself carried meaning. In a society obsessed with virility, losing hair could feel like losing status. Remedies, however ridiculous, were in high demand. Mixtures of bear grease, crushed herbs, or, yes, crocodile dung, again smeared hopefully onto shiny scalps. Did they work? Of course not. But the belief itself tells you how powerful hair was in the Roman imagination. You look around the shop and see men rubbing oil into their scalps, women sniffing jars of perfumed creams, slaves bundling swept clippings with care. Every strand, every curl feels charged. The barbershop isn't just a place of grooming, it's a temple of tiny rituals, each snip echoing with superstition. And as you rise from the chair, your own hair scattered on the floor, you wonder what fate those fragments might meet once you've left. A broom and a trash heap, or something far stranger, whispered over under moonlight. The sun outside the barbershop slants lower shadows stretching long across the tiled street, but inside the room is still buzzing with voices. You notice how the chatter has shifted, how it's no longer just playful teasing or harmless scandal. It's sharper now, tinged with the names of senators and generals, the kinds of words that could ripple far beyond these four walls. You realize that barbers weren't only caretakers of hair, they were custodians of news. A man sat down for a shave, and while the razor skimmed his chin, he spilled fragments of what he knew, a whispered rumor from the Senate floor, a muttered complaint about taxes, a brag about a patron's new villa. Each fragment added up, and the barber, always listening, always nodding, became a living archive of secrets. Here's your straightforward historical fact. Roman satirists like Juvenal and Martial occasionally hinted that barbers were notorious chatterers, repeating gossip so quickly it seemed to sprout wings. Their shops buzzing with conversation functioned almost like proto-news stands where you could hear the latest without ever picking up a scroll. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that spies occasionally posed as barbers or bribed them to gather information. After all, what better way to eavesdrop than to hold a blade at someone's throat while they muttered nervously about politics? It sounds like the setup for a cloak and dagger comedy, but in a city where betrayal was common, it's not entirely far-fetched. Historians still argue whether barbers deliberately manipulated information. Were they simply careless gossips, or were some skilled in the art of shaping rumor, nudging stories in ways that served their own patrons? The evidence is foggy, but the possibility makes every whispered phrase in the shop feel a little more dangerous. You imagine the scene. Two clients argue softly over whether a law will pass, their voices rising above the scrape of razors. Another man interrupts with a wild claim about the emperor's latest mistress. The barber laughs at one, nods at the other, and later that afternoon repeats both stories in a different form to the next listener. By nightfall, the whole neighborhood is humming with speculation. It's a strange power, isn't it? This man with scissors and soap, shaping not only appearances, but public opinion. You picture him as a kind of civic spider, sitting at the center of a web of whispers, each strand quivering with some new rumor. And in this moment, as you sit back in the chair, you understand why Romans both trusted and feared their barbers. The cut they gave you wasn't just to your hair, it was to your privacy, your dignity, maybe even your safety. The blade was only half the risk, the words were the rest. The hum of conversation drifts on, and you start noticing how many familiar faces cycle through this tiny shop. Not just ordinary laborers or curious matrons, but men with rings on their fingers, women trailing silk hems, even envoys strutting with attendants at their heels. The barbershop, you realize, was more than a grooming parlor. It was a stage where Rome's different worlds collided. Picture it. A senator leans back in the chair, eyes half closed, while a barber scrapes his chin. Across the room, a freedman debates grain prices with a craftsman, their words bouncing over the scent of oil and lather. A soldier, dusty from the field, mutters about campaign rumors, while a merchant fusses over the latest shipment from the east. No matter who you were, if you needed a shave, you ended up here side by side with the rest of Rome. Here's your crisp historical fact. Public barbershops tonstrini were inexpensive, which meant they drew a wide range of clientele. They were one of the few places where social classes mingled regularly, unlike the rigid seating of the theatre or the hierarchy of the baths. And here's the quirky tidbit: sometimes people didn't even come for grooming at all. They came just to listen. The barber's shop doubled as a hangout spot where loafers sat around catching up on gossip they couldn't afford to buy elsewhere. In a way, it was the Roman version of scrolling through a feed without ever posting. Historians still argue whether barbers themselves wielded any real influence over politics, or if they were simply conduits spreading stories others created. Did a barber ever shape an election with a careless comment, or were they just the city's loudspeakers echoing what powerful men wanted heard? The answer remains uncertain, but the possibility lingers like the faint sting of aftershave. You imagine leaning back overhearing a senator grumble about a rival's new proposal, and then later watching that same line of complaint ripple through the market stalls, the taverns, and even the temples. A single mutter sharpened by repetition becomes a rumor strong enough to rattle reputations. It's almost comical, isn't it? All the marble forums, all the oratory, all the grandeur of Rome, and yet so much of its heartbeat pulsed right here in a room that smelled faintly of sweat soap and singed hair. The barbershop wasn't just a mirror of society, it was one of its engines humming away with every snip and scrape. And as you sit listening, surrounded by this strange blend of high and low, you feel it sink in Rome's real conversations. The ones that shaped lives and sometimes fates weren't always shouted in the Senate. Sometimes they were whispered here, over the hiss of a razor and the rustle of falling hair. The evening deepens, and you notice how the shop's chatter isn't always about politics or fashion. Sometimes it slides into the rhythms of everyday life, gripes about neighbors' stories of ridiculous customers, or half-remembered jokes that make everyone laugh until the barber's hand wobbles dangerously. The barbershop in its way was a theatre of humor as much as it was of gossip. Picture a group of men lounging on benches teasing one another about bald spots or uneven tans. A barber pauses mid-shave to deliver a punchline, the whole room erupting in laughter, and for a moment the razor in his hand feels less threatening, more like a prop in some long-running comedy routine. Humor was woven into Roman life, and here, among hair clippings and soap, it softened the hard edges of the city. Here's your historical fact. Roman satire, one of the era's most enduring literary genres, often mocked barbers and their chatter. Writers like Horace and Martial joked that a trip to the barber guaranteed not only a cut, but a torrent of ridiculous stories. It wasn't just a stereotype, it reflected how strongly the profession was linked with banter and wit. And the quirky tidbit: some barbers were known to double as amateur dentists, yanking teeth while cracking jokes to distract their clients. Imagine laughing nervously at a barber's pun while he tugged at a molar with iron pliers. Not exactly a service you'd review 5 stars for, but in Rome, convenience sometimes mattered more than comfort. Historians still argue whether barbers' humor was seen as charming or low class. Was it endearing that they teased senators about their receding hairlines, or was it an annoyance that underscored their lack of refinement? The evidence splits depending on whether you're reading the words of elites or glimpsing the everyday life of common Romans. You sit in the chair now listening to a barber tell a story about a man who swore he could grow his hair back by rubbing pigeon droppings on his scalp. The room roars with laughter, and for a moment all divisions, rich and poor, citizen and slave, fade in the shared absurdity. Humor, you realize, was Rome's great equalizer, at least in this little room. And perhaps that's the secret. The gossip may have carried risks, the razors may have drawn blood, but the laughter was what kept people coming back. Because after a day of taxes, marching, or political scheming, sometimes all you needed was a bad haircut, a worse joke, and the comfort of knowing everyone else was laughing too. The lamps are lit now, flickering in bronze holders, their glow painting soft shadows on the walls. The barbershop hums with a quieter energy, not the raucous banter of midday, but the slow murmur of voices winding down. You sense that this is more than just the end of a day. It's the long echo of a tradition that stretched across centuries. Think of it from the first Greek barbers who settled in Rome, to the tonsors who clipped and shaved soldiers before campaign, to the gossip spinners who spread news faster than any messenger, the barber's role was never small. Each snip of the blade carried echoes of hygiene, discipline, fashion, superstition, and power. In this simple act of grooming, entire layers of Roman society overlapped. Here's your steady historical fact. Barbers remained central figures in Roman towns well into the imperial period, their shops multiplying in every district. The presence of a tonstrina was as reliable as a tavern or a bathhouse. And here's the quirky detail. Some emperors, paranoid about gossip and assassination, reportedly had private barbers who worked in seclusion, sometimes even slaves, trained for the role so that no outsider ever got close with a blade. You can imagine the awkward loyalty tests those poor men endured, their razors gleaming under the eyes of suspicious guards. Historians still argue whether the barber's influence truly reached into politics, or if writers exaggerated their role for comedic effect. But even if the impact was smaller than legend suggests, the symbolism lingers, a profession that touched the body, and in doing so, touched the pulse of the city. You take one last breath inside the shop, inhaling the scent of oils and faint smoke. You see the piles of clippings swept into corners, the half-empty jars of ointment, the benches worn smooth by 1,000 conversations. You hear the laughter fading, the whispers lingering, the soft scrape of a razor being set aside. And you understand finally that the Roman barbershop was more than a place to trim hair. It was where identity was shaped, secrets slipped free, reputations rose and fell, and the whole restless city found a mirror for itself. Now the night outside grows deeper, and the sounds of Rome fade into something softer, just the hush of sandals on stone, the distant trickle of a fountain, the sigh of wind moving through colonnades. Inside your mind, the shop grows still too. The lamps burn low, the clatter of tools is silenced, and all that remains is the quiet after so much chatter. You can picture the barber sweeping slowly, the bristles of his broom whispering against the tiles. The last client has gone, the gossip spent the day folded into memory. Even the razors rest dulled by use, waiting for tomorrow's edge. There is no hurry now, no urgency, only the steady rhythm of closing. Let your thoughts slow with his sweeping. Let them gather like clippings in a corner, loose and harmless, ready to be carried away. You are safe here, in the gentle afterglow of voices that no longer demand your attention. You don't need to listen anymore. You don't need to answer. The shop is quiet and so are you. The flicker of lamplight grows softer, still fading into the kind of darkness that isn't empty but calm like velvet. The air is warm, the hum of the city now no more than a lullaby at the edge of hearing. You lean back the chair supporting you and let yourself drift the way the gossip did, unhurried, weightless, without resistance. And as you let go, remember, every empire leaves behind its echoes, every whisper finds its silence, and even the busiest barber's chair comes at last to rest. Sleep now, gently, easily knowing the story has folded itself around you.